The year is 1888. The heart of London beats with the pulse of industry, but in the East End, a different story unfolds. Whitechapel, a maze of cobblestone streets and flickering gaslight, becomes a hunting ground. The air, thick with the stench of poverty and despair, now carries a new scent: fear. Fog, a constant companion, rolls in from the Thames, shrouding everything in an eerie silence. It is in this fog-choked labyrinth that Jack the Ripper stalks his prey. His victims, women trapped in the unforgiving grip of poverty, become tragic players in a macabre spectacle. Their lives, often ignored and marginalized, are extinguished in a brutal flash of violence. The autumn of 1888 becomes synonymous with terror. Whispers of the Ripper's deeds travel beyond the confines of Whitechapel, seeping into the drawing rooms of the well-to-do. Fear, once confined to the shadows of the East End, begins to cast a long shadow across all of London. Jack the Ripper. The name itself sends shivers down the spine. It evokes a sense of dread and curiosity, a dark chapter in the annals of crime. He remains an enigma, a phantom who vanished into the fog as quickly as he appeared. His presence was like a ghostly whisper in the night, leaving behind a trail of terror and unanswered questions. His true identity, lost to history, has fueled endless speculation and debate. Scholars, detectives, and enthusiasts have all tried to piece together the puzzle. But the picture remains incomplete. Was he a doctor? His anatomical knowledge evident in the horrific mutilations inflicted upon his victims? The precision of his cuts suggested a familiarity with the human body that was both chilling and methodical. Or perhaps a butcher, accustomed to the sight and smell of blood. The brutality of his actions hinted at someone who was no stranger to the visceral reality of death. Theories abound, each more outlandish than the last, yet none can definitively unmask the monster who terrorized Whitechapel. From royal conspiracies to deranged lunatics, the list of suspects is as varied as it is long. The Ripper's legend is further fueled by the taunting letters he allegedly sent to the police. These letters, filled with chilling boasts and cryptic clues, only deepened the mystery. These letters, filled with chilling boasts and cryptic clues, only deepened the mystery. They were a macabre game, a twisted form of communication that kept the authorities on edge and the public in a state of fear. Were they genuine missives from the killer or the work of a morbid prankster eager to capitalize on the city's fear? The question remains unanswered. The letters added another layer to the already complex and terrifying narrative. The lack of a definitive suspect, the brutal nature of his crimes, and the mysteries surrounding his identity have all contributed to the enduring fascination with Jack the Ripper. Each new theory, each new piece of evidence, only seems to add to the enigma. He is a specter that continues to haunt the collective memory, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most civilized society. His story is a grim testament to the fact that evil can exist in the most unexpected places, and that some mysteries may never be solved. To understand Jack the Ripper, we must delve into the mind of a monster. This journey takes us back to the foggy, gaslit streets of Victorian London, where fear and mystery shrouded the East End. The Ripper's reign of terror was not just a series of gruesome murders, it was a psychological warfare that left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of the time. Criminal profiling, a nascent field in the late 19th century, offers tantalizing clues. The early profilers, though lacking the sophisticated tools of modern forensics, relied on keen observation and psychological insight. They sought to understand the mind behind the madness, to piece together a portrait of the killer from the fragments of his horrific acts. Experts, analyzing the Ripper's modus operandi, paint a picture of a man driven by a potent cocktail of misogyny and a need for power and control. His methods were not random. They were calculated, each act a deliberate statement of his twisted psyche. The Ripper's choice of victims, his timing, and his methods all point to a deeply disturbed individual with a clear, albeit perverse, agenda. The brutality inflicted upon his victims, particularly the mutilations, suggests a deep-seated hatred of women. This was not mere violence. It was a manifestation of profound rage and contempt. The Ripper's actions were designed to shock, to horrify, and to send a chilling message to the society that he loathed. These were not merely acts of violence. They were personal, intimate violations designed to degrade and dehumanize. Each cut, each mutilation, was a deliberate act of defilement, stripping his victims of their humanity in the most grotesque manner possible. The Ripper's crimes were a dark reflection of his inner turmoil and his pathological need to dominate and destroy. The Ripper's victims were not simply people to him. They were objects upon which to act out his twisted fantasies. These women, often marginalized and vulnerable, became the canvas for his macabre artistry. In his eyes, they were mere instruments for his expression of power and control, their lives extinguished to satisfy his insatiable bloodlust. The precision of the Ripper's cuts, often performed with a surgical skill that belied the chaotic nature of the murders, suggests a degree of anatomical knowledge. This level of expertise has led many to speculate about his background. Was he a doctor, a butcher, or someone with a similar profession that provided him with a disturbing familiarity with the human body? The exact nature of his skills remains one of the many enigmas surrounding his identity. This has led some to speculate that he may have been a doctor, a butcher, or someone with a similar profession that provided him with a disturbing familiarity with the human body. The precision and confidence with which he executed his gruesome tasks indicate a practiced hand, someone who knew exactly what he was doing and took a perverse pleasure in his work. The Ripper's ability to vanish into the labyrinthine streets of Whitechapel after each murder suggests a familiarity with the area. He moved with an eerie confidence, slipping away into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of terror and confusion. This intimate knowledge of the streets, the alleys, and the hiding places of his hunting ground points to a predator who was deeply embedded in the very fabric of the community he terrorized. He was not an outsider preying on a community he did not understand. He was a predator who knew the streets, the alleys, and the hiding places of his hunting ground. This familiarity allowed him to strike with impunity, evading capture and continuing his reign of terror. The Ripper's legacy is not just one of brutality, but of a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human soul, hidden in plain sight, waiting to strike. Section 4. The Shadow of Fear, Whitechapel's Reign of Terror. The autumn of 1888 cast a long shadow over Whitechapel. The air was thick with an eerie sense of foreboding, as if the very streets themselves whispered tales of dread and despair. The Ripper's reign of terror transformed the already impoverished district into a place of palpable fear. The once lively streets were now haunted by the specter of death, and the residents could feel the weight of the menace that lurked in the shadows. Women, particularly those who walked the streets alone at night, lived in a state of constant anxiety. Every footstep behind them, every shadow that moved, was a potential threat. The fear was so intense that it seeped into their daily lives, affecting their every action and decision. The police, overwhelmed and under immense pressure to catch the killer, increased their presence in Whitechapel. They patrolled the streets tirelessly, their eyes scanning every corner, every alley, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive murderer. Yet, despite their efforts, the Ripper continued to elude them, seemingly melting into the fog after each gruesome act. The frustration and helplessness of the police were palpable, as they grappled with the reality that the killer was always one step ahead. This only added to the sense of dread that permeated the district. The fear was not just of the Ripper himself, but of the unknown, the unseen danger that could strike at any moment. The murders had a profound impact on the social fabric of Whitechapel. The community, already struggling with poverty and hardship, was now torn apart by fear and suspicion. Neighbors who once looked out for each other now eyed each other warily, unsure of who to trust. Women, fearing for their safety, were reluctant to leave their homes after dark. The streets, once filled with the sounds of life and activity, were now eerily silent, as if the very heart of Whitechapel had stopped beating. The once bustling streets grew quiet as night fell, the silence broken only by the sound of police constables patrolling their beats. The flickering gas lamps cast long, eerie shadows, adding to the sense of unease that gripped the district. The Ripper's crimes exposed the dark underbelly of Victorian society, highlighting the plight of the poor and the vulnerability of women in a male-dominated world. The murders brought to light the harsh realities of life in the East End, where poverty and violence were everyday occurrences. The fear that gripped Whitechapel was a stark reminder of the precariousness of life in the East End, where poverty, violence, and despair were constant companions. The Ripper's reign of terror left an indelible mark on the district, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of Victorian society. The media frenzy that surrounded the murders only served to heighten the sense of fear and panic. Newspapers were filled with lurid details of the crimes, and the residents of Whitechapel could not escape the constant reminders of the terror that stalked their streets. Families huddled together in their homes, trying to find some sense of safety and security in a world that seemed increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. The Ripper's reign of terror was not just a series of brutal murders, but a psychological assault on the entire community. The police, despite their best efforts, were unable to bring the Ripper to justice. The case remained unsolved, a haunting reminder of the limits of their power and the depths of human depravity. The legacy of the Ripper's reign of terror would continue to haunt Whitechapel for years to come. Section 5. Surgical precision, calculated cruelty, the modus operandi. The Ripper's crimes were not simply acts of violence. They were performances of terror. His modus operandi, characterized by surgical precision and calculated cruelty, set him apart from other killers of the era. Each murder was a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to shock and horrify. The Ripper's victims were often found posed, their clothing disarranged and their wounds exposed. These were not hasty killings. They were deliberate acts of defilement, intended to humiliate and degrade the victims even in death. The Ripper's desire to control and manipulate extended beyond the grave. The Ripper's knowledge of anatomy was evident in the precision of his cuts. He often removed organs with a skill that suggested a familiarity with surgical techniques. This led many to believe that the killer had some medical training or experience. The Ripper's crimes were not random acts of violence. They were carefully planned and executed. He chose his victims, stalked them, and killed them in locations that offered him an element of control and the opportunity to escape unseen. He was a hunter, and Whitechapel was his hunting ground.